John, let's start off with how you view the situation. We have the US warning that without proper planning, you have a looming disaster. Saudi Arabia now calling on the UN to stop this from happening. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's been foretold really with the sort of request from Prime Minister Netanyahu to prepare plans, and obviously the statements you alluded to from the United States, from the European Union, from Saudi Arabia. Um, it's really hard to fully fathom how an operation like this can be feasible, considering that we have 1.4 million people from across the Gaza Strip now concentrated in such a small parcel of land at Rafah, and the dire humanitarian conditions that they're already living in 127 days into this war. So, I share the alarm that you've been discussing from different world leaders, from different humanitarian organizations. And I think also it's worthwhile noting that the Saudi Arabian statement came as they were convening other Arab states in Riyadh to talk about some sort of an off-ramp, some kind of a diplomatic process that might stop this continuing escalation. And they, like all of us, are also aware that we have the Muslim holiday of Ramadan approaching, and sort of the tensions in the region being ratcheted up, the risk of escalation beyond the tragic consequences in Gaza have not gone away. And I feel that we're really looking, again, 4 months into this war, over yet another precipice.
When you listen to the reasons given by Benjamin Netanyahu, Mark Regev, his spokesperson today, reiterating that if they don't go into Rafah, it's the one territory that they haven't been into to, quote, achieve total victory and clear Hamas from some of these underground bunkers. Yahya Sinwar, the leader, said to be still somewhere in Gaza. I thought he was in Khan Yunis. He wasn't. What's your take on that explanation to say if they don't do this, the whole operation could be rendered potentially pointless?
I mean, 127 days, almost 30,000 victims in the Gaza Strip into the war. The idea of us talking about this being pointless, it's kind of extraordinary, to be honest with you. But I think it's also worthwhile acknowledging and reflecting on the second war aim that the Israeli government articulated early on in the war around the rescue and release of the hostages. Now, it's safe to assume that those that still remain alive are probably in Rafah. And any ground invasion that goes in, and I know this from speaking to families of hostages as recently as this week, it radically increases the likelihood that those remaining surviving hostages will lose their lives. And I'm not the first person to point out that the two war aims being declared are in tension with each other. I returned from the region almost 2 weeks ago. I met with families of hostages. I've been speaking to people who are incredibly concerned about their fate. And it's worthwhile acknowledging that we're only 2 weeks away from Bill Burns, the director of the CIA, being here in Paris, discussing with Qatar and Israel a proposal to release the hostages in return for a pause in the violence. And I really do have to ask why we're now discussing this imminent escalation and invasion when only 2 weeks ago we had a proposal that could result in a cessation of violence, even only temporarily, and the release of those hostages. Surely more time must be given for that proposal to play out, and for the chance of those hostages coming home alive, humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, and the daily loss of life we're seeing, all to be paused, if not ceased altogether.
That's a really good point, John. It was here in Paris, as you say, that the head of all of the intelligence agencies, the US, Egypt, Israel, Qatari Prime Minister as well, there was a counter-proposal by Hamas. That counter-proposal was seen as, dismissed instantly by Benjamin Netanyahu, and there's relatively little chatter from leaders. We still await the fact that it hasn't been discounted. Those talks as dead in the water at the moment. John, you also talked about how you met some of the families of hostages. Can you tell me about the vacuum, the perspective that they have at the moment in terms of the risks? Do they want this war to come to an end? Is that a universal feeling amongst the families and hostages?
Well, I mean, the one thing you always say about Israelis is there's no such thing as a universal feeling. It's a country with as many opinions as citizens. But certainly the people that I've been speaking to, I mean, one is the mother of a 19-year-old girl who was taken hostage, and she's an alumni of one of our members, Hands of Peace. This is a young woman who'd spent time peace building between Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, she's scared, terrified around the risk of further escalation. We know that there's been repeated attempts to meet with the Prime Minister, to meet with the Likud party, to make the case by certainly a large group of hostage families about the need for there to be a negotiated agreement that secures their release. It's also quite clear from in leaks as well as on the record reports from inside the war cabinet that the two other main figures in that cabinet, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, they have both said that there needs to be a prioritization of the release of hostages. So it's fair to ask whether this is the priority of the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, around this escalation, rather than the concerted opinion of the entire war cabinet. And it's also worthwhile noting that Prime Minister Netanyahu is deeply unpopular amongst the large majority of Israelis because of the perception of his own fault for what happened on October 7th. And these are very consequential decisions being made right now.
John, we'll speak again soon, no doubt. John Lyndon, good to talk to you, the Executive Director for Alliance of Middle East Peace here in Paris.